So sad. Hmm.
Desireful, asleep
Is all about lunchtime on ABC. Time now for the skinny, starting with a night to remember at the Apollo. This year's Soul Train Awards played out last night inside the legendary Harlem Theater here in New York City. Some of the biggest names in R&B took to the stage with powerful performances by Maxwell, Ashanti, Ja Rule, and Bruno Mars, kicking the night off with Silk Sonic. We're going to leave the door open for them. Bruno Mars, Anderson .Paak, and Silk Sonic were the night's big winners, collaborating to win 3 awards for their hit, Leave Them Star Open. Among the night's highest honors, Ashanti receiving the 2021 Lady of Soul Award, and Maxwell was awarded this year's Living Legend, an honor that he said made him feel humbled.
We had food stamps. We had, low-income housing, but we had a radio, and the radio was the window to my dreams. And to be able to stand here before all of you and to be part of the community of R&B and soul music is truly the award that I've always wished for. But this literally is blowing my entire mind. So,
what a speech. Among the night's top winners, Justin Sullivan for Album of the Year and Best R&B Soul Female Artist, and Giveon for Best R&B Soul Male Artist. I should know how to pronounce his name because I love his album. I love his music, but I've always gone back and forth. Giveon? Is it Giveon? We got both. Yes, but I also love to see Ashanti get her flowers because it's given me very early 2000s. That woman was R&B princess.
She looks like she did 20 years ago.
Oh, better.
Even better.
Actually. We're going to stay in early 2000s.
We're stay that vein next to a couple of celebrity couplings.
That's right. Lindsay Lohan has announced her engagement to Beyonce Bader Shamas, an assistant vice president at Credit Suisse in Dubai. The couple has been dating for 2 years.
And based on that rock she's sporting on her finger, they are doing quite well. At least one diamond expert estimates that ring to be worth at least $250,000.
Not too shabby. And 46-year-old Casey Affleck has gone into
more and more problems. Our school district is is about a D level by state average. So that means we have third graders that can't read to grade level. And yet they spend millions of dollars on putting social justice and equity and diversity training into everything. It's political. They use equity and diversity to actually reinstitutionalize racism. They call themselves anti-racist, but they're really racist. We are fighting back. We're trying to get rid of it at the state level, in our school level. And so it's a big problem in the state of Texas and all over the country, actually. I've been networking with other parents and actually teachers that are frightened and terrified that this is taking over our education system in the United States.
The first funerals of miners and rescuers killed in last week's mine explosion in Siberia have been held. The accident claimed the lives of 51 people, and there is still an ongoing search for more victims. More now on the impact on the local community is Dimitri Pack.
With an incident such as this, the tragedy goes far beyond simply those who lost their lives. We met with Valeri, who had worked at the Siberian coal mine for decades. The people who died in the aftermath of the explosion were his old-time friends. He was lucky not to share their fate.
2 or 3 years ago, I used to work in the section where all the people have been recently killed. They were my friends. On that day, I was off. I was working in the garage when my colleague called me. He told me that he'd heard one of the employees talk about
ordinary story. A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in the global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive? Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in the global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive? Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
We move up to the vehicle. He detonates the bomb.
The heroes who stopped the killing, who held the city of Austin hostage for 19 days.
The tripwire. All hands on deck.
The clues, the Home Depot video, that truck, and the agent who connected the dots.
It was exactly the vehicle that we were looking for.
Inside the investigation,
Band made contact.
the takedown of the bomber. Now streaming on Hulu.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do? I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
4.
Skyscrapers booming America. Cadillacs zooming America. Industry booming America.
But what's the hardest homicide investigation you can be given? One without a body.
Yeah.
William Hammery.
Coming up, the startling secret that Marie kept from just about everyone.
I went up and I put my hand on her stomach and I said, what's going on with this?
The story of little baby Grace was about to give investigators a very big break. When Dateline continues. And good evening from New Orleans, big military operation producing massive crowds. That's not so bad.
Our world is facing some complex issues. Chuck Todd breaks them down. Every Thursday, a deep dive into a new subject. Meet the Press Reports. All episodes of Season 3 are now available on demand on Peacock.
You feel like a bad guy in this? Why should people believe you when they know people are getting hit? Has it been worth it to make this trip? Do you feel like you're giving a green light to politicians? How do you explain why your case has become so important?
Call him a fashion icon doesn't really do him justice. I see him more as a cultural icon.
Virgil was 41 years old. The brilliant mind was even asked to work alongside Mercedes-Benz in hopes of bringing luxury to electric cars. Was that that guy?
No, a cultural icon indeed. He collaborated with Kanye West, but it wasn't even just that. It was the fact that you had a black man who was a creative director of one of the most famous fashion brands, high fashion brands, and that was a loss, and he never compromised his culture. He always brought it along and actually infused it to make it better. So, yes.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move. Let's move it. We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is oh
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us. It's an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive? Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020 True.
This.
In just hours, opening statements set to begin in Ghislaine Maxwell's highly anticipated trial. Steps from where convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein died in an apparent suicide.
I think Epstein's death makes this case the only opportunity really to hold him and Ghislaine Maxwell accountable and to give these survivors some measure of justice.
Maxwell faces sex trafficking charges that could land her in prison for the rest of her life. The prosecutor painting the British socialite turned suspect as a key figure in bringing a stream of girls as young as 14 to Epstein's estates for sexual abuse.
In my opinion, she might have been just equally as bad as he was.
Jennifer Araz told NBC News she was 15 when Epstein raped her, though she won't be one of the 4 women who are expected to testify with allegations mostly from the 1990s.
Will we see Maxwell testify? I don't know. There's definitely a risk of testifying, but I think they'll make a game day decision based on how they believe the government's case has gone in.
Maxwell insists she's innocent, awaiting her trial from behind bars. She described it as a living hell, telling the Daily Mail, "I am weak, I am frail." Her siblings pleading with the United Nations to help get her out, calling Maxwell's pretrial detention unprecedented discrimination.
She's treated as guilty. She banged up 500 days, and they're hoping, no doubt, the authorities, that they're going to be able to put her away for 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 years. Well, let justice decide how that's going to be.
The trial is expected to span 6 weeks, but will likely leave a lot of unanswered questions around her and Epstein's relationships with big names, such as Britain's Prince Andrew and Presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by
How much would you pay for this artwork? In March 2021, this art piece created by digital artist Beeple sold for over $69 million, becoming one of the most expensive works of art ever sold at an
Cannabis, or marijuana, is one of the most popular psychoactive substances worldwide, especially among teenagers. Although the specifics of cannabis's addictive qualities are still very much under debate, cannabis dependence disorder is officially classified in the DSM-5, and prolonged heavy use has been shown to cause some level of dependency. Cannabis comes from the flowers of Cannabis sativa plants, which has oils with concentrations of tiny, fat-soluble psychoactive molecules called cannabinoids. The three main cannabinoids, tetrahydrocannabinol, also called THC, cannabidiol, also called CBD, and cannabinol, also called CBN, are each associated with unique psychoactive effects. For example, THC is associated with high-grade recreational marijuana and produces effects like euphoria, analgesia, mild hallucinations, and an increased appetite. Cannabidiol, on the other hand, does not have psychoactive effects and is commonly included in medical marijuana because it has a variety of effects, including being analgesic, anti-inflammatory, anti-seizure, appetite stimulating, and anxiety reducing. To understand how cannabis works, let's zoom into a synapse of the brain to see how a stimulus response is induced generally, without drugs. Normally, electrical signals or action potentials travel down the axon to the axon terminal, triggering the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters from synaptic vesicles into the synapse. The neurotransmitters travel across the synapse and bind to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, where they give the cell a message. After those neurotransmitters have done their job, they unbind from the receptors and can simply diffuse away, get degraded by enzymes, or get picked up by proteins and return to the release site in a process called reuptake. When cannabis is consumed, the cannabinoid compounds it contains bind to cannabinoid receptors, which are found in the central and peripheral nervous systems, as well as certain types of cells, like immune cells. These receptors are normally stimulated by endogenous cannabinoids, also called endocannabinoids. A real-world example is the runner's high phenomenon, in which a naturally occurring endocannabinoid called anandamide gets released during strenuous exercise, making the runner feel less anxious. The way it works is that anandamide is released from postsynaptic dendrites, and it diffuses retrograde, meaning backwards, to the presynaptic terminal where it binds to the cannabinoid receptor. At that point, there are intracellular changes that ultimately lead to a change in the flow of calcium and potassium across the presynaptic cell membrane, which inhibits depolarization. So the presynaptic nerve terminals stop releasing neurotransmitters like GABA and glutamate, which reduces neuronal excitability, a process called presynaptic inhibition. In summary, anandamide from the postsynaptic neuron basically pumps the brakes on neurotransmitter release from the presynaptic neuron, and the result is a feeling of calm. Because THC has a similar chemical structure to anandamide, it can bind to cannabinoid receptors and trick the body into producing a similar feeling, minus the hard work of a strenuous run. In fact, cannabinoids are extremely lipophilic, meaning that they can easily get into the central and peripheral nervous system and can stimulate receptors for much longer than endocannabinoids, creating a prolonged effect. Now, there are two types of cannabinoid receptors, cannabinoid receptor type 1 and 2. Cannabinoid receptor type 1 is mostly found in the central nervous system, and is highly concentrated in areas like the cerebral cortex, cerebellum, hippocampus, basal ganglia, hypothalamus, and spinal cord. Cannabinol binds to cannabinoid receptor type 1, slowing down activity in those parts of the brain, which results in mild hallucinations, decreased stress, impaired learning and memory, altered movement and coordination, increased appetite, and analgesia. Activation of the cannabinoid receptor type 1 also activates the body's endogenous opioid system, releasing dopamine into the nucleus accumbens to produce feelings of pleasure and reward, which explains why the pathway can be addictive. In contrast, cannabinoid receptor type 2 is found on immune system cells and peripheral nerve terminals. Cannabidiol binds to cannabinoid receptor type 2, inhibiting their activity and producing anti-inflammatory and analgesic effects. THC, on the other hand, can bind to both cannabinoid receptor type 1 and cannabinoid receptor type 2, and therefore has a wide variety of effects. Now, the pharmacokinetics of cannabis differ depending on whether the cannabis is smoked or consumed orally. The majority of recreational users smoke cannabis via rolled cigarettes called joints, as well as in pipes or with vaporizers. The cannabis in a joint contains a compound called tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, which has to be heated to become psychoactive THC. The process of heating actually destroys about a third of the THC, and more is lost with exhalation and side stream smoke, which is the smoke that leaves from the end of the cigarette or pipe. So only a fraction is inhaled and absorbed into the lungs. Inhaled THC goes from the lungs to the bloodstream and gets into the fatty tissues of the brain and body where it can accumulate. That's why the effects of smoking cannabis can be felt within minutes and can last several hours. Edibles, on the other hand, are consumable products that contain cannabis, and they also have to be heated to transform tetrahydrocannabinolic acid into psychoactive THC. When a person consumes an edible, digestive enzymes break down the majority of the THC, leaving behind only a portion of the THC to get absorbed into the bloodstream. Blood from the gastrointestinal tract gets delivered to the liver.
Polygamy in the home of the pastor stayed carefully under wraps. So if the news got out to the rest of the church, did Tanya worry about what might happen there?
That's what she was covering up. She had to protect James and protect that was their world.
Did she do something to Marie to protect James? 2 months after Marie disappeared, the detectives got permission to look at the cell phone records of all three of them. Would they prove Tanya was with Marie when she vanished and thus, maybe, did something to her?
Cell phone tower information put her away from the area.
No, nowhere near. Marie sent that mass text message saying she was leaving town. Both her phone.
This Sunday, the new coronavirus variant.
This variant has a large number of mutations, and some of these mutations have some worrying characteristics.
The U.S. and Europe imposing restrictions on travel from southern Africa.
Something that I'm concerned about. You want to be honest.
This.
Why are you like villain?
So most of us think that information is the best way to convince people of our truth. And in fact, it doesn't work that well. And we see that all the time, right? We see it where with climate change, where there's tons of data suggesting that climate change is man-made, but about 50% of the population doesn't believe it. Or with people arguing about things like how many people were in the presidential inauguration. So we have facts, but people decide which facts they want to listen to, which facts they want to take and change their opinions, and which they want to disregard. And one of the reasons for this is when something doesn't conform to what I already believe, what people tend to do is either disregard it or rationalize it away. Because information doesn't take into account what makes us human, which is our emotions, our desires, our motives, and our prior beliefs. So for example, in one study, my colleagues and I tried to see whether we could use science to change people's opinions about climate change. The first thing we did was ask people, do you believe in man-made climate change? Do you support the Paris Agreement? And based on their answers, we divided them into the strong believers and the weak believers. And then we gave them information. For some people, we said that scientists have reevaluated the data and now conclude that things are actually much worse than they thought before, that the temperature would rise by about 7 degrees to 10 degrees. For some people, we said the scientists have reevaluated the data and they now believe that actually the situation is not as bad as they thought. It's much better and the rise in temperature would be quite small. And what we found is that people who did not believe in climate change, when they heard that the scientists are saying actually it's not that bad, they changed their beliefs even more in that direction. So they became more extremist in that direction. But when they heard that the scientists think it's much worse, they did nudge. And the people who already believed that climate change is man-made, when they heard that things are actually, scientists are saying are much worse than they did before, they moved more in that direction. So they became more polarized. But when they heard that the scientists are saying it's not that bad, they didn't nudge much. So we gave people information, and as a result, it caused polarization. It didn't cause people to come together. So the question is, what's happening inside our brain that causes this? And in one study, my colleagues and I scanned brain activity of two people who were interacting. And what we found was when those two people agreed on a question that we gave them, the brain was really encoding what the other person was saying, the details that they gave. But when the two people disagreed, it looked metaphorically as if the brain was switching off and not encoding what the other person was saying. And as a result, when the two agreed, they became even more confident. But when they disagreed, there wasn't much of a change in their confidence in their own view. What has been shown by Kahan and colleagues from Yale University is that the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are, in fact, to change data at will. So what they did is they first gave participants in their experiment analytical and math questions to solve. And then they gave them data about gun control. Is gun control actually reducing violence? And they found that more intelligent people actually were more likely to twist data at will to make it conform to what they already believed. So it seems that people are using their intelligence not necessarily to find the truth, but to take in the information and change it to conform to what they already believe. So so that suggests that just giving people information without considering first where they're coming from may backfire at us. But we don't always need to go against someone's conviction in order to change their behavior. And let me give you an example. So this is a study that was conducted at UCLA where what they wanted to do is convince parents to vaccinate their kids. And some of the parents didn't want to vaccinate their kids because they were afraid of the link with autism. So they had two approaches. First, they said, well, the link with autism is actually not real. Here's all the data suggesting there isn't a link between vaccines and autism. And it didn't really work that well. But instead, they used another approach. So instead of going that way, they used another approach, which is, let's not talk about autism. We don't necessarily need to talk about autism to convince you to vaccinate your kid. Instead, they said, well, look, these vaccines protect kids from deadly diseases, right, from the measles. And they showed them pictures of what the measles are. Because in this argument about vaccines, people actually forgot what the vaccines are for.
what are they protecting us from? And they highlighted that and didn't necessarily go on to discuss autism. And that had a much better outcome. The parents were much more likely to say, yes, we are going to vaccinate our kids. So the lesson here is that we need to find the common motives. The common motives in this case was the health of the children, right? Not necessarily going back to the thing that they were arguing about, that they disagreed about.
What is the best sort of life for a human being? Socrates claimed in 400 BC that a man lives a happier life if he's just. Even if he's thrown starving into prison for the rest of his life, then if he's unjust and he's celebrated and honored all of his days and is never caught for his crimes. Could that possibly be correct? If not, why not? And what difference should the question make to us now? What moves the human heart? Shakespeare's characters throw us into the depths of lust, envy, greed, pride, ambition. What do those characters have to say about the way that we act, or that we behave, or that we believe? And if so, what difference would it make to read about them in Shakespeare? And why Shakespeare, whose Elizabethan English is very difficult for us who speak modern English to understand? Thomas Hobbes wrote in 1651 a book called Leviathan, one of the 2 or 3 most influential works in the history of thinking about government and politics in Western society. He was writing from the midst of a raging civil war, and he argued
He said about President Obama, I'm going to quote you. He grew up and nobody knew him. Nobody knows who he is until later in his life. The whole thing is very strange. What are you driving at there? Are you a Bertha, Donald?
Let me just say, I was a really good student at the best school. I'm not like a smart guy, okay? David.
Fucking trivia. This is insane.
Tonight, drastic action across the globe as the newly named Omicron variant spreads. President Biden holding an emergency meeting with his COVID task force. Restrictions on travel from 8 African countries to the U.S. starting within hours as public health officials prepare for what may come next.
It certainly shows the signs of being able to spread quickly.
Chaos at airports around the world as this variant is being identified in more.
Is to go around the world and investigate different housing issues to see how are people faring with respect to the right to housing. A woman is fighting for the basic right to housing. The whole house is sinking.
And that's their plan for all the buildings.
The COVID-19 vaccine for children aged 5 to 11 is a smaller dose, but has one extra ingredient that's not present in the vaccine for ages 12 and up. In our weekly COVID-19 Q&A with Toronto's Associate Medical Officer of Health, a parent asked what tromethamine is and why it was added to this version of the vaccine.
What this ingredient is it's, for example, commonly used in IV dyes, IV contrast dyes. So, for example, if you get a CT scan in the hospital. So it's used as a medical ingredient. It's a type of buffer or stabilizer. My understanding is that the change was to allow the vaccine to be more fridge stable. And we know that that's important because when we had the vaccine for adults, in the new year, it could not be stored in the fridge for very long. It meant that doctors and pharmacists could not actually have the vaccine. It just logistically made it harder. So they made that change of formulation. And so this vaccine can stay in a fridge for 10 weeks, which means that doctors, pediatricians, pharmacists, they can get the vaccine. And that's actually a very good thing for parents to get.
If your job is servant branding, this is not servant branding. It's an intimidation and more.
The violent arrest of a black youth in Quebec City overnight, November 27th, is sending shockwaves across social media. The incident caught on video showing a police officer using his boot to jam snow in the face of a teenager who's pinned headfirst on the ground by other officers. Quebec City Police is now investigating the incident. A warning to our viewers, some may find these images disturbing.
Clear excessive force. This is as bad as Rodney King, as bad as many of the other things we've seen. And it's very, very important that, first of all, the families of these youth react and hopefully take action.
It was maybe 4 officers on the skid, and you can do that.
The videos show another teen then getting dragged as cries of onlookers break out.
What the fuck?
Was maybe in town for pleasure with friends. It's no reason is good for have this move.
The teen, initially pinned down, was left with gashes and bruises on his face from the incident.
For sure, it's traumatizing about this.
Friends who identified the person in the video as a 17-year-old refugee from Uganda who boxes as a hobby, trained by former pro boxer Eric Martel Boheli, were left in shock.
We have very good moments when we are together. It's a kid who's dedicated to boxing.
On Sunday, Quebec's Deputy Premier and Public Security Minister Geneviève Guilbeault took to Twitter saying she has seen the videos circulating online. She says these images are very difficult to view. An internal investigation is underway to shed light on this disturbing situation.
We cannot rely on and trust the police to conduct an internal investigation into something as gross, something that basically offends common decency.
The Quebec City Police Department saying in a press release, the Service de Police de la Ville de Québec, SPVQ, has been made aware of videos circulating on social networks involving police officers who allegedly intervened in a matter that greatly concerns the management of the police department. At the moment, the professional standards module is in the process of identifying the police officers involved. The measures will be determined as soon as the analysis of the evidence is completed.
It requires very, very firm action, and the most important thing is basically an independent, impartial, and objective investigation into this incident.
We need to show this video and show this story for change the mentality and change the future of police.
In Montreal, Alicia Bertucci, City News.
Fucking lose it.
Welcome back. The criminal investigation into former President Trump's family business is reaching a critical phase. Outgoing Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance Jr. is narrowing his focus to whether Mr. Trump fraudulently inflated the value of his assets to obtain better financing. One person with a lot of insight into Mr. Trump's financial dealings, particularly pre-2017, and perhaps the direction of this case overall in New York, is his former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen. Cohen pled guilty to charges including arranging hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels, ended his 3-year sentence last week, much of which was spent at his home. Cohen also has written a memoir of his time with Mr. Trump called Disloyal. Michael Cohen joins me now. Mr. Cohen, welcome to Meet the Press, sir.
Nice to see you, Chuck.
So let me start with what you know about the Manhattan DA. We're not far from the end of the calendar year. He's termed out. We know this. We know the new DA hasn't been read into the investigation yet, since he's not been sworn in. Should we expect to see actual indictments before the new year?
You know, I generally try not to talk about the DA, which now also includes the Attorney General's civil case in the same exact matter. So I really try not to talk about it because it's their investigation, nor do I want to tip off Trump or the Trump organization's people about what is actually happening. So, you know, I would rather just not answer that specific question, other than to say that you can bet your bottom dollar that Alan Weisselberg is not, and I truly say, I mean this, Alan Weisselberg is not the key to this. They are going after Donald, they're going after Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, they're a whole slew of individuals, family as well.
You were just referred to Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer. He was indicted. It looked to a lot of observers that this was the type of indictment that was brought against you, essentially, which was, in the previous cases, which was to squeeze you and hope that you would cooperate. Were you surprised Alan Weisselberg hasn't cooperated?
Yeah, so they didn't really do to Alan Weisselberg what they did to me. You know, the threat against me was that they were going to file an 85-page indictment that was going to include my wife. They were going to say she was a co-conspirator to the hush money payment, which is absolutely nonsensical. And look, I'm married now 27 years. I'm with the same woman for 29 years. There was no chance in the world that I was going to put her at risk with these animals. The way they came down on me is nothing like what they're doing to Weisselberg. They should be squeezing right now Barry Weisselberg, who worked for the Trump organization, and they should be squeezing Jack Weisselberg, who is one of only 2 organizations that made loans to the Trump organization that we still know. You know, when you talked about whether or not Donald Trump inflated or deflated his assets, right, every single word that I had said about that is 100% accurate.
Are you their only witness on this, or have they found other witnesses? Because it does seem as if they have this hypothesis, but you've got to prove it. You're one witness. They're going to want somebody in the Trump organization actively too. Do they have it?
So again, I don't want to get into the investigation at all, but rest assured, I am not their only witness. And most importantly, what I gave to them are thousands and thousands of documents. And as you know, in law, there's something called documentary evidence. I'm not asking anybody to believe me. They're no different than when I testified before the House Oversight Committee. Every statement that I make, I've backed up with documentary evidence. I truly believe that they could indict Donald Trump tomorrow if they really wanted and be successful.
Do you believe, considering what they're investigating, are you confident you did help Donald Trump commit crimes?
I can assure you that Donald Trump is guilty of his own crimes. Was I involved in much of the inflation and deflation of his assets? The answer to that is yes.
I take it then you've been given some level of immunity from the DA and the Attorney General in New York, have you not?
Yeah, my case is over. It was over when I had pled guilty. It was all part of one big giant package.
So everything here...
And it's amazing that I'm the only one. Yeah, it's amazing that I'm the only one that ended up doing prison, right? And indicted, incarcerated out of this entire group. I mean, the documents speak for themselves.
It's funny you say this because I wonder, here you've been cooperative.